This is The Baseline, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA.
Welcome, everybody. You are tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And if you have not had your ears to the ground over the last week with what players have been saying amongst themselves, their teammates, and even to their own ownership and franchises, then you have not been following basketball, and you need to stop watching General Hospital, because the drama is in the NBA. And I cannot wait to get my right-hand man on board so we can kind of talk about, quote-unquote, the drama that's happening in the association. So let me go ahead and roll out the red carpet to my right-hand man, 50 grand, NBA aficionado, writer, owner, the big man, doing it big with www.shawsports.net. Big Kahuna PNC, my brother from another mother, Mr. Warren Shaw, repping out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Holla back at me, Mr. Shaw. Word is, man, it's getting a little chilly down there in Fort Lauderdale. Say it ain't so.
Chilly for the South Floridians for sure. You know, we're down here in the low 50s, if you will. Got a little rain as well, too. So South Florida is not what it usually is. But salute to all the fans, listeners of NBA Baseline. This is going to be a fun show. A lot of drama in the league, as you alluded to, my dude. And again, I just can't wait to jump right in.
I mean, it hasn't even been a full 7 days. And already there is enough scripts to basically last maybe all three major networks that do soap opera dramas from 12 to 4 p.m. from Monday through Friday, given what's happening with the Knicks, Bulls, and Cleveland Cavaliers. It's absolutely amazing. And it's funny, Shaw, what losing can really do in exposing basketball teams who clearly have rolled the dice in this offseason with some of the acquisitions and free agency pickups, especially high-profile teams, major market teams, and one of the bigger teams that did the impossible last year in the Cleveland Cavaliers.
Yeah, I think those are great points. You know, when you're talking about the Cleveland Cavaliers, defending champions, but Chicago Bulls, New York Knicks are two teams that are right there in the thick of the playoff hunt. So some of the drama that's taking place with all of these teams, maybe we saw it coming. You know, I think for sure we did see it with maybe the Bulls and the Knicks to some degree. But it's interesting that it's taking place right now with both of those teams right in the thick of the playoff hunt. You know, you feel like, okay, they should be trying to focus on winning games as opposed to some of the drama that's taking place around them.
Definitely. And so clearly our breakdown topic for this week is going to be discussing the drama that's reigning in the Eastern Conference with the New York Knicks, the Chicago Bulls, and the Phil Jackson. We will break down the caveats of what's happening with each of those teams and give you our perspective of possible resolutions or what the outcomes may possibly be moving forward, as especially we start moving closer to the NBA trade deadline. Also, in our segment of The Drop, my man Shaw has brought it back. We got that Who You Got segment, and we got two nice names for you to lament over. We got Nikola Jokic and Krstaps Porzingis. So in a little bit, we're going to give you our perspective of who we got, because we certainly want to know who you'd have on your roster. So we have that for The Drop. And then, of course, we got to cover the coast to coast, discussing the news that's happening in the association. All that and so much more. Once again, be sure to get at my man Shaw at Shaw Sports NBA. Get at me at GameFaceLee, but we always ask you to get at the show's Twitter handle at NBA Baseline. Available on all the major platforms. Available on Microsoft TuneIn, Stitcher Radio, Player FM, and iTunes. Also available on Google Music and the Roku channel. Be sure to check out our show as well, especially on 16 wins. Is it 16 wins a ring?
16 wins a ring, brother.
Oh my goodness, man. Listen, that would be a nice one, like Peter Piper picked a peck of pickled peppers. I can say that a heck of a lot better than I can say the website. But be sure to go check out the website. They have awesome NBA content, and is always encouraging some of the great writers online, on board, giving you exactly what you need and inside information regarding the NBA. Also, special shout outs to our guys at Sports Brothers, available Monday. They have their show Monday through Friday. We simulcast our NBA topics of conversation, the Baseline NBA podcast. Jeff Fox and the brothers, they handle their business down there. So be sure to go and check out the Sports Brothers. They discuss South Florida topics, but they also cover all that's happening in the world of sports. So you know how we do. And you know how we like to start this off. It's time now for the breakdown.
Time to break it
down to the bone gristle.
Time now for the breakdown. Kyle Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. And the topic clearly is regarding the drama that's happening right now in the Eastern Conference. Funny, There's very little drama happening out in the Western Conference, maybe because the drama is speaking more about what's happening on the basketball court. Teams are too busy trying to pulverize each other that they got to worry about talking about anything to the media. But let that not be said with what's happening in the Eastern Conference. Shaw and I are ready to break down each of these three teams. But before we do that, Shaw, we felt that it was fitting because you had introduced this a few shows ago that we needed to educate ourselves. We needed to make sure that we have stepped up our vernacular each and every single week when we have to start digging into these topics. And so it'll be hard pressed for us, Shaw, that you do not lead us to the promised land of understanding another word that would be dubious towards what we have for our segment of the breakdown.
Yeah, it's interesting, going through these words of the days and words of the week, I guess, for us here on the baseline, and came up with today's word is going to be macerate. And the macerate is spelled Macerate. Macerate. The definition is to cause or to waste away, as if for excessive fasting, or if you're soaking it, it starts to separate. And we're going to apply this word to some of our teams in the breakdown here. In terms of, I think they are starting to break away and they are starting to separate, especially in the locker room when it comes to the Chicago Bulls and front office management between Phil Jackson and New York Knicks. Their relationships are starting to macerate.
Oh, man, what a word. And let me say, Shaw, I am actually dumbfounded and in awe of your ability to search for such a word. I think it's applied very nicely. So let's go ahead and get right into this, right? Let's first start talking about the New York Knicks, because I really feel that what's happening right now with the New York Knicks definitely has a lot of steam, and there's definitely a lot of momentum, especially up here in the New Jersey, New York area. There's so much conversation and talk. It's actually hurting my ears because I feel like there's so many people that are chiming in, more so people that probably don't follow or don't even give a damn about the New York Knicks at this particular moment in time, because they either don't care about Carmelo Anthony or they don't care for Carmelo Anthony and they really don't care for Phil Jackson. So this quote unquote circus that seems to be happening right now in New York, highly publicized and highly predicated on really trying to understand what is the actual intent between both of these two polarizing figures, not just from a player ownership, a player management perspective, but really from their own personal aspirations and goals when they came on board for the New York Knicks. Everybody, we don't need to get into all of the semantics about what has occurred. Everybody has heard that Carmelo Anthony basically has been the one standing out, answering the plethora of questions about whether or not he feels his time is up with the New York Knicks. And because Phil Jackson has been, quote unquote, silent about the situation, certainly has perpetuated the situation to escalate further than probably more than it needs to. And then you also add on top of the fact that this team has lost 13 of its last 18 basketball games. And that just basically lends credence to the idea that maybe it is time that Carmelo Anthony and Phil Jackson try to part ways. It will not be amicable, certainly will not be without a lot of drama happening. But Shaw, I'm really interested to get your perspective from this. Who's really at fault for this situation? And do you have any sympathy or empathy at all for what's happening to Carmelo Anthony?
It's weird because I think on some levels, I think both parties are at fault. Everyone has a part to play in this. And I do feel a little bit for Melo slightly, because I think he, like I said before, I think he wants to win and win in his own way. And I don't know that that's necessarily the right way. And apparently it's obviously not, but he's trying to do things for the New York media, or New York team rather, but still keep his family and all his business dealings kind of intact by staying in New York. However, we've all had the conversations about what potentially happened if he were to waive his no trade clause and then where he potentially go. Having that clause obviously gives him the right to dictate where it is and what teams he's looking to go to. And the only thing that I knock really about that situation is he is not necessarily being very open about that. I think in terms of where he's only isolated it to 2 or maybe 3 teams, if you will, that he'd be willing to go to. That to me shows that, all right, he realizes that maybe the marriage is just irreparable and it can't happen for him in New York. And if he is going to uproot his family in the middle of the season, he wants it to be to a place where he has friends and he can be most comfortable immediately. And that's why I would have a knock on him, because if you're trying to win, then you need to go to the best situation that can make you win. And you need to open up your your options to more teams, but he's still being mellow. You know what I mean? And he wants his money, and he wants to go. He wants to do it exactly in his way.
Yeah. Let me first address the situation with Carmelo Anthony. That one, I have some sympathy and empathy for Carmelo Anthony because I think as a pro athlete, no matter how much money you're getting paid, even if you are the superstar player, you are the marquee player, you should not have to be answering questions about your future with an organization that ultimately should be answered together with the management and with the organization. The fact that Phil Jackson, the fact that general manager Mills and even Dolan have not come out and have said anything. You know how managers in baseball, in the NFL, quote unquote, get that vote of confidence that they're planning to keep their head coach, that their head coach is not under the hot seat or anything like that. I don't understand why, if you're paying someone $122 million to be the cornerstone of your franchise, that you're trying to build a championship team around, that you're not going to stand out and say, we are thoroughly behind Carmelo Anthony, unless the intent is that you are not behind Carmelo Anthony, and that you are at the point where it's time to say, hey, we want to get rid of you. Okay. So in that particular regard, I do have sympathy and empathy for Carmelo. Where I don't have sympathy and empathy for Carmelo Anthony is where I thought that maybe he had turned the corner by coming to the place, his birthright, where it all started for him, coming to play for a herald franchise like the New York Knicks after suffering what he went through in Denver. And let me say this, I give all the credit in the world to Carmelo Anthony. He made the Denver Nuggets basketball team a relevant basketball team, because it ultimately was a small market basketball, and it still is. But during that period in time, they were a tough basketball team to play for in the Western Conference. And what we thought he was bringing to the New York Knicks was trying to restore the tradition of a Knicks basketball team being relevant in the Eastern Conference. And it's on a major market. We felt like Carmelo Anthony could be that guy, that this is the situation he wanted to be in, and being one of the most prolific scorers in the NBA, that would warrant it. But quite honestly, the same attitude and demeanor that Carmelo Anthony carried out in Denver, which ultimately forced him out of there. I mean, the Denver Nuggets organization ultimately said, we can't have this anymore with him. Like, we pretty much have done everything we possibly can to acquiesce building a team that is built for Carmelo, but Carmelo is not building a team that's going to be a sustainable championship-like basketball team. And so now you come over to New York, and here is this opportunity where you have a downtrodden New York Knicks organization that is willing to do anything, and you have a superstar player like him. He needed to step up and do more, in my opinion, to really kind of bring it all together. And I don't feel like that was ever the case. I think from what I've seen from Carmelo Anthony, and I'm not taking anything from him as a player or person or anything like that. It's just, this is just how some players are. I got to handle my business, because I don't know if the organization that I'm playing for is going to handle my business for me. And ultimately, the same thing that's happened to him in Denver, we're seeing replicate itself with the New York Knicks.
It is, and that's unfortunate, but in different ways. You would hope old habits would die hard, if you will. And I think, Melo leaving Denver was a much different situation on some levels, in terms of him trying to force his way out, maybe his relationship with George Karl and that whole nine, if you will. Now it's his relationship with Jackson, and just the fact that the Knicks have not gotten over the top. It's one of those things where it just hasn't worked. As much as he wants it to, it just hasn't worked. And, it's rare to some degree to see a superstar of his caliber. And I guess there are people out there who would debate whether or not he's a superstar. But Carmelo, again, he's going to be knocking on the door of the Hall of Fame, just but from a statistical standpoint. Whether or not he actually gets moved or allows himself to be moved, especially in the middle of the season, that remains to be seen. But I think the question that we really need to figure out here now is, should he? Is it really time? Does he need to be like, listen, okay, fine, yes, you're forcing me out, But as you said, so eloquently, should he acquiesce to the fact that Phil Jackson does not want him there anymore and say, okay, let's open this thing up and see where I can go?
Now, here's the thing, Shaw. It's kind of funny because as we ask that question, now here you're beginning to see where this would probably be crossroads. It's actually parallel paths to purgatory for the New York Knicks organization, because no matter what Carmelo Anthony does, it will not absolve Phil Jackson and what I consider Phil Jackson's philandering, because we've been trying to figure out what Phil Jackson's plan has been for the New York Knicks organization to restore that greatness. We thought that he was going to change the culture of the New York Knicks organization post Mike D'Antoni and post all of the drama that James Dolan has basically manifested after the Van Gundy project. Okay, so my whole thing with Phil Jackson is, even if you get rid of Carmelo Anthony, what is going to be your plan? You go ahead and you trade for Derrick Rose, right? You go ahead and you throw a ton of money out to Joakim Noah, who's underperformed. I mean, he can basically be what you consider in our generation at this particular juncture a top 5 in the worst free agency acquisition pickups in NBA history for our generation. Okay, he's trending in that path. I'm not gonna get too far ahead of myself because, maybe like the miracle of medicine or whatever the case may be, you send Noah out there to Phoenix like Grant Hill did, maybe he might figure out a way to get his feet back in order, and he goes out there and plays a semblance of the reason why they threw him this ton of money that they threw him. But the problem that I have with Phil Jackson is no matter what you do at this point with Carmelo Anthony, it still does not absolve the situation with regarding the New York Knicks. And the biggest problem now is, even if you do figure out a way to move Carmelo Anthony, are you really getting back what is valued for what you have gone through, re-signing Carmelo Anthony for the amount of money that you've done, and ultimately scrapping the idea that you were trying to go for it now because you clearly thought that this team should be good enough to at least get in the playoffs?
Yeah, I think it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't situation. All parties involved. I really do. I think if Melo is to be traded, the haul Phil Jackson gets back for him is going to be heavily scrutinized, and everyone is saying, okay, well, it needs to be something of the ilk of like Denver got when they traded Melo. You need to get multiple rotation players and a couple picks and things that can make sense for you. I don't know if Phil's going to do that because, as there's so many people involved, and the trade that's being talked about the most is potentially going to the LA Clippers, and that does not have Blake, DeAndre, or Chris Paul coming back to New York. Now they're talking about getting a third team involved, as our guy Keith Smith from 16 Wins Ring reports, saying that the Celtics may be interested in being that third team. But if Blake, DeAndre, Chris Paul aren't being involved in the deal, well, there's nothing the Celtics would want from the Knicks or the Clippers that I can think that would make sense for them. So really, how do they get involved in this? And that's just one potential team, if you will. But you're 100% correct. The organization doesn't really have a clear direction, other than the fact that if Melo's gone, well, they know that they don't necessarily need to resign Derrick Rose next summer. Krstaps Porzingis will clearly be the face of that franchise, but then how do you build around him from there? So this year, if it were to happen, and I mean this year, meaning in this current season, you can forget pretty much the Knicks really being competitive or really doing much with it. It would then to be determined, can they get some free agents to come, and what would they do with the draft pick, or if they trade for picks and that type of thing? How, in essence, would they build over the course going into next season? I don't think it can be judged by this alone, but we already know, and is well documented, that Phil hasn't done the job that everyone thought he was going to come and do. He hasn't lived up to that hype. So I think making a move now potentially doesn't buy him time. I wouldn't so go far as to say that. But it would be reasonable to expect, okay, well, now there's clearly a shift. There's a pivot in direction. Now they have to figure it out what that pivot is going to look like.
All right. One thing I want to get into, Shaw, really quick before we move things along and start talking about the Chicago Bulls situation is really the mindset of Carmelo Anthony. And I want to make sure that I'm saying this for people who listen to this show, that when we bring up these topics in conversation and when we talk about these things, there is no personal ill will that we have for the players, for the coaches. This is just perspective, okay? It doesn't mean that I have no respect for a man and the way that he goes about the business of not only just taking care of himself, but also building his brand and his legacy as a pro athlete. I just finished watching Roger Federer do something remarkable at age 35 in a sport that literally requires you to tear your kneecaps and your hamstrings and your ankles playing on a variety of different courts, and to basically win 18 titles on a variety of different courts, and playing in a field where it's you, a racket, a ball, and somebody else that is opposing you. I mean, Carmelo Anthony in ways has the luxury of knowing that while he could do great things individually, he does have a team around him. And I think that if you're expected to be a champion, that you are going to have to take your game to a level that inspires the guys around you to play at that point. And I just feel like that is just something that where Carmelo Anthony has kind of missed the mark on. And it doesn't mean that Carmelo Anthony will never be a great player. He is a great player. He's going to be a Hall of Fame player. But it's just interesting because I go back to the fact that maybe we took for granted the things that Carmelo Anthony was saying during the Olympics run, when he received his third Olympic medal, and the media was interviewing him, and he said these quotes, and maybe at the time we just took it for he's just in the moment of winning Olympic gold, doing something that no other basketball athlete it has done for U.S. men's basketball, or as being a herald person winning gold. He says, most athletes don't have an opportunity to say that they won a gold medal. Better yet, 3 gold medals. I would be very happy walking away from the game knowing that I've given the game everything I have, knowing I played at a high level in every level, high school, college, won a championship at Syracuse in college, and possibly 3 gold medals. I can look back on when my career is over, if I don't have an NBA championship ring, and I say I had a great career. Now, we've seen Stephen A. Smith, get into his tirade going off on Carmelo Anthony, Skip Bayless, and all of these high-profile on-air personalities. But what I'm taking from this is in correlation to the mindset of a pro athlete. And we've seen this with Derrick Rose. We've seen this with other athletes who are at a juncture in their life where they're thinking about the prosperity, about where they want to be 5, 10, 15 years from now, where the game gets away from them. And to me, Carmelo Anthony, in my opinion, felt like, listen, if I don't win an NBA championship, if I don't, get rings like my man LeBron and Dwayne Wade and all of my homies, you know what? That's all right, because I've got these other things and I still did great things. And that's okay. The problem that I have with what happened with Carmelo Anthony, especially in this situation, is that we are absolving him for the fact that he says that he is okay with this because he did all of the things that were necessary for him and not necessary for him winning a championship. Because when you compare that to what guys like LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, Chris Bosh, and all those guys in this draft class have done, they sacrificed something because down the road, they saw that they were going to reap the benefits, whether it was off the court or eventually being on the court, which is winning a championship. And I feel like that's going to be a mark that's going to stain Carmelo Anthony, no matter how much money he makes or how much of a mogul he will be, and to the legacy that's going to kind of follow his generation, his kids moving forward.
Well, it's tough. I think it's tough for him. He didn't want to, in a lot of ways, do exactly what LeBron and Dwayne Wade and Bosh and all those guys and people from the class did. He wanted to kind of carve out his own path. So on one hand, you're like, hey, great, good for you. You're trying to be different. But when you see that it's led to championships for those guys, with the exception of Chris Paul, and that's not the same draft class, but, they're all in the same, little circle, if you will. And I think that's why maybe now he's considering it. Maybe he's considering, going to LA and trying to play with Chris Paul and seeing if they can get things done out there. Because at the end of the day, this season and all the bashing, all the conversation has taken its toll. And nobody wants to be in a place where they're just not wanted. And whether you have a trade clause or no trade clause, whether that's the case or not, if the city organization, the higher ups that really make the decisions just don't want you there, it can't be comfortable. Like, it just can't be. So although Phil is passively aggressively trying to move him out of his own comfortability, he's going to probably have to just kind of give into that, I think, at some point. And whether that's, like I said, this season or whether that's in the summer, we won't know. But you're 100% correct. He hasn't done everything he's needed to do to win at the highest level in the NBA. And I think he's wanted to go about it his own way. And that, again, is, I think, his gift and his curse in the same breath.
But most definitely. And one other thing to add on, Shaw, about that point, and I think what you just said, excellent point. My thing is this: if you're Carmelo Anthony and your expectation is that you do want to win a championship, that means you have to parse down your expectations about how you want to continue your networking aspirations and building your empire off the NBA basketball court. Because I can list you 3 or 4 NBA teams right now where if he goes in there, they literally can be much better and give that team a better opportunity to play possibly in a conference finals. And ultimately, he could be the reason why they ultimately go to an NBA championship, because I'm not saying that Carmelo Anthony is still not capable of scoring 30-something points per game. The problem is that he's playing in a system that is not conducive for him to score the way that he's used to scoring. But for some other basketball teams that are desperate for that type of shot-making ability that Carmelo Anthony possesses, teams like the Detroit Pistons, teams like the Toronto Raptors, teams like the Memphis Grizzlies, he could easily catapult these teams to be relevant. I don't know if they're going to be better than the Cleveland Cavaliers, but I can certainly say that they are going to be a much better team competitive-wise if they do cross paths against those teams, and he ultimately could be the catalyst to get them over the hump at some particular point, if he believed that. But because those are not high-profile, high-marketed type places for him and his business ventures, that's the reason why he shuts them down. And ultimately, he continues to shut down his own progression for him to ultimately get to what we think he was supposed to be getting to, which is an NBA championship. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our segment of the breakdown: drama reigns in the East. We talk about all of the issues that are happening with 3-point and very high-profile basketball teams, the New York Knicks, Chicago Bulls, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. Let's go ahead and shift gears, Shaw, to the Chicago Bulls. And man, look, I don't know what I can say about this. I don't know if I'm more thwarted by the fact that maybe we expected there to be some form of drama, because we understood that this dynamic of Jimmy Butler, Dwayne Wade, and Rajon Rondo, while it could potentially be a solid type of combination of players to push them into the playoff picture, it could also be one that's a potential combustible scenarios. And right now, it's about as combustible as you could possibly get. Because if Dwayne Wade and Jimmy Butler are basically getting bleeps in their post game interviews, and Rajon Rondo got to take to Insta chat and Snapagram for him to call out his own teammates, you know that and if Taj Gibson of all people is getting verbiage, is getting print on media about stuff calling out other veterans, you know that it's madness in the madhouse in Chicago, bro.
What a disaster in the Windy City, bro. Just what a disaster. You really would have hoped that a team with veteran-laden guys like the Chicago Bulls would be able to handle it a lot better. And Taj Gibson is probably one of the more likable guys in the NBA too. And reports of him saying that Butler and Wade, they've developed kind of a buddy ball system where they're just kind of doing things themselves, and just because they don't trust the pass, they don't trust other players on the team.
Which is the absolute worst scenario you could possibly have, especially with that type of team.
And it's absurd considering Wade knew exactly what it took to win a championship. Just how we were talking about Carmelo earlier, Wade, kind of bowed down, if you will, and acquiesced. But I guess he doesn't feel there's anybody on this team to really kind of bow down to, if you will. So he's right alongside with Jimmy B and saying, okay, well, me and you will have to kind of do it. And one of the things that, and I just want to go back real quick, and not to rehash Wade's comments, but I thought it was real shady of him to say those things after he had one of his best games of the season, no less, because there's been plenty of games where Wade had 5 points or 11 points and 2 of 15 shooting and things of that nature. He waited till he busted out and had a 35-point performance and was playing, really great basketball before he sounded off the way he did. And, this is not the first time Butler has done that. But for Wade, I was like, that was, whatever. It was very, very ill-timed, I think.
It kind of felt like being a Mary Jane kind of moment.
Yo, bro, I was just, I wasn't feeling
salty about that. Listen, I would be very salty about that. First of all, it is so unlike Dwayne. And let me say this real quick, Shaw, because we don't always talk about how the residue, the stench of I didn't use this as I figured, since your word was so great, like mine would not be able to compete. I think this is a great time for me to put in my word of the week.
Word.
Acrimonious. All right.
Word.
Acrimonious. The word acrimonious as an adjective, causing, stinging, or bitter in nature, speech, behavior, right? Medieval Latin. So the fact that Dwayne Wade gets medieval on his own teammates in Chicago. I don't think that this is something that is just profound and is indicative of the persona of Dwayne Wade, the legendary Miami Heat player who's won 3 NBA championships, who sacrificed to bring the money so he can bring LeBron James and Chris Bosh, who played, you know, the baby face, so to speak, in the situation, saying I gave up money so I can give Pat Riley these championships and all, and we sympathize for him. I don't think him just suddenly now turning heel, you know, going Ric Flair on us and everything like that was just, I think part of that is the residue and the stench of the situation and how he was treated in Miami. And I think now he seems to carry that acrimonious nature in him with all kinds of management and teams that he is not accustomed to, that he doesn't have true control over. I really feel like this is a pit stop to him. I really do. And I really think that he walked in here with no confidence, thinking that this basketball team was going to be competitive enough to compete. I think that he recognized the fact that he was getting his money from an organization that's willing to pay the money to him. And so because of this, not only does it air badly on Dwayne Wade, but I think it airs badly on the decision-making by Paxson, the GM, for even attempting to do this.
Well, that's going to be really interesting, you know, one way or the other, because if he's trying to use that as a pit stop, he has his player option next year, right? But is he really going to be opting out of almost $24 million? Can he get that somewhere else? And then it's like, okay, well, now we're haggling over a couple $1 million, which for them is really like a couple dollars, you know, between his contract with the Miami Heat and what he was offered there. So if he does opt out, which could very well be the case, that brings us to, I think, our next problem with the Chicago Bulls is trying to figure out what can they do as a result of things that have happened now. And that to me is a very, very interesting question, because I think we put out a poll on Twitter whether or not we thought Jimmy Butler is a franchise type player. Is he somebody that you can build around? Yes, we know he's great. He can score. He's an all-star and all of those things. But does he have that next level mantra and leadership that can be a franchise builder? Or is he just a really good number 2 guy? And I think the poll was that everyone thought we could, or it was like maybe like 60%, so that Jimmy Butler could be that guy. That brings me back to Wade, because if he's not a part of this plan and a part of this future, he has, like I said, he has a player option. Everyone is talking about the potential of moving Butler out right now before the trade deadline or whatever the case may be. If they are going to make a move, the move really should be with Wade, because if there's any inclination that he would opt out, and they can't lose him for nothing and just not have anything to build off of. Wade would be the guy that you would need to trade and probably could bring you back something at least decent to try to build on if you're willing to build around Jimmy Butler. The question with Rajon Rondo, that's both team and player option for next year. And I think, you know, there are teams that might be willing to take a chance on him, using him as a backup point guard. That, you know, that is obviously a debatable question. But to me, really, if Chicago is fearful of anything that's happening, they should be fearful of Wade if he is getting an inclination that he's not happy in Chicago and would opt out over the summer.
Let me throw a scenario out there, Shaw. You know, we were just talking about the New York Knicks trying to find them a third suitor. What about maybe the Chicago Bulls? Do you think the Chicago Bulls would try to put themselves in a situation to figure out a way to move Dwayne Wade maybe to Cleveland? Because clearly the idea is they're not trading Kevin Love straight up for Carmelo Anthony, right? But would there be a way to be able to move players from Cleveland to Chicago and ultimately New York? And I'm not asking you to figure out a way to do that, but could you see the Chicago Bulls being a possible third party if the New York Knicks were to reach out to them and something like that possibly go down?
I mean, it just depends, you know, what exactly is happening. I think Melo would be a little bit salty if he saw part of the deal was Wade getting to Cleveland when he wants to go to Cleveland, and then he ends up having to go to LA as a result of it. I think his first choice is obviously the Cavaliers, of the defending champions. So if he saw Wade and LeBron hook up again as a part of a deal that he was involved in, I don't know how excited he'd be about that. So remember, he's still the kind of always a determining factor with that. But yeah, it would be very interesting to see if New York could engage Chicago in some sort of conversation with that. You know, does Wade come around and change some of this culture one way or the other in New York? I doubt it. And then again, I don't know where he wants to be. Wade's Wade's thinking to me is very, very key in all this because, like I said earlier, it's $24 million that he could opt out of. Does he think he could get that much money on the market again with everything going up still? Could he command that much salary, especially giving off the rocky things that he's going on in Chicago right now? I don't know. But if he's just unhappy, because I think there was a comment that came out earlier in the week, it's like, okay, I've made enough money. Well, then people were like, well, if you made enough money, then why'd you not just go stay in Miami? Oh, it was about the principal. All right, well, what is it? You know what I mean?
Right.
like, what is it here with Dwayne Wade? So I think obviously he's a Hall of Fame guy. He's a great person. Does a lot of things off the court and is doing a lot for the community of Chicago in that of itself. But what he wants to do with his basketball career, we don't really quite understand because right now Chicago is in that kind of the doldrums and they're very confused and Wade's confused in the situation. Even
and you know what's so sad though is that this team is only 2-3 games under 500. It isn't like I understand that everybody's looking at this and they're looking at this team and thinking it's an epic failure. Is it more so an epic failure than what we compare to the New York Knicks? I mean, where did we possibly think that the Chicago Bulls were going to wind up being in the Central Division to begin with anyway? I certainly didn't have them as a top 2 team in that division, let alone being an upper echelon team in the Eastern Conference. So I really don't see the problem to me is not so much the fact that this team doesn't perform. I mean, they're going to lose some basketball games. They're not that good. Some of the players, in order for this Bulls team to actually be good, they're going to have to get better. Or they're going to have to make moves and make the basketball team better. So, part of that's going to be on Paxson. Part of that is going to be on the chemistry between Dwayne Wade and Jimmy Butler. Forget even Rajon Rondo, because ultimately, if Hoiberg has no faith in Rondo, clearly that means he's going to say he's got to have faith in Michael Carter-Williams. I don't care who it is, but whoever's on that basketball court that's representing the Chicago Bulls, they ultimately have to get better. But it's not like they're 15 games under 500, and the season is absolutely hemorrhage to the point that we're talking about them in the same breath that we were talking about the Brooklyn Nets. I mean, to me, that it's just absolutely absurd. But when you do the things that both Wade and Butler have done at this particular juncture, in the way that they have kind of put their players, their teammates out on Front Street the way that they've done, then it speaks more to the fact that this basketball team never had it together to begin with, and they've just been riding on the talent. And maybe if that's exactly the sentiment that both Butler and Wade have about the situation, they are doing themselves no service, because ultimately, if Paxson wanted to move some of these players, you don't think GMs are not looking at Mirotic, is not looking at McDermott and all of these guys saying, if you can't get these guys to ball, what makes you think that I need to bring them on my team to suddenly do something unless it's a rebuilding process?
Yeah, it's very interesting in terms of trying to figure out what assets the Bulls have if they were to try to break this whole thing up. Obviously, Butler, fine. There's would be plenty of suitors lining up for him. Wade, I think there'd be suitors lining up. But again, just trading him, and then he has that 1 year opt out. So are you making that move to try to get him? Rondo, same thing, team and player option. Taj Gibson's going to be a free agent. Mirotic, same thing, is going to be a free agent. MCW is a free agent. So this team, one way or another, should and could look very different going into next year. But do they just say, you know what, bump it, we're done, and just figure out where the chips fall? I agree with you. I think there's a lot of selling pennies on the dollar, if you will, if you're trying to make a move now because you see the dysfunction and you just kind of try to figure out what's going to happen next. This is a team that probably needs to wait to the very last minute in terms of the trade deadline. Maybe they can string a couple of wins together, going into All-Star break, and then it looks a lot different. The funny thing is we're talking about it right now at the end of January, beginning of February, and the NBA news cycle is fickle. So what was hot and what was like, oh my God, what are they going to do a week ago? It kind of cycles out maybe 2 weeks from now if they can start to pull some wins together and get that locker room under control. And then they can say, okay, you know what? We don't have to sell as many pennies on the dollar as we thought of. Maybe we can still make a move one way or the other.
You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. Our breakdown segment, drama reigning in the East, just finished discussing the circumstances, situation happening with the New York Knicks and the Chicago Bulls. And Shaw, let's go ahead and wrap this up with what's happening with the Cleveland Cavaliers. Look, when the king speaks, the world stands in attention. Okay, so let's let it not be known that when LeBron James airs out his feelings about situations that's happening, sometimes it's just what it is, and sometimes there is a cryptic message that seems to surface itself and kind of makes more waves than necessary. And when I take from what's happened with LeBron James talking about how we're a top-heavy basketball team and that we need to get better and we need to do things, I tend to feel like the situation from Kyle Korver obviously was not a move that he was in favor of. And we've seen how LeBron James treats players who are not on his page and not feeling him, right? And we also see here is that clearly there is still beef. What's beef? Beef is LeBron James, Dan Gilbert, and that ownership. And let's not get it twisted. While we all are basking in the glory of greatness with LeBron and what he did for the Cleveland Cavalier community and everything like that, man, I'm telling you, this situation is one bad move from it getting even uglier since the first go around when LeBron James left Cleveland.
Yeah, I don't understand Braun sometimes, and there was a great point, I think, brought up by Brian Geltsizer on NBA's Fair Satellite Radio. LeBron is one of those dudes, and where he's to the point where you should listen to him unless he's wrong. Mm-hmm. But you're not going to know he's wrong unless you listen to him. You understand what I'm saying? Yep. So then it's like, oh, I was wrong. Well, you shouldn't have listened to me. He's in that, like, whatever, catch-22 situation, no matter what. So that's kind of where the Cleveland Cavaliers are at, and they have to treat him that way, and it sucks. Obviously he's as great as he is. He's a Hall of Famer. He's won multiple championships. He brought a championship to the Cleveland community for the first time in umpteenth amount of years. But he's one of those guys where he just wants his way, unless he's wrong. And I think, to me, that really poses a really, really difficult question for the Cleveland Cavaliers, who have the highest payroll in the entire NBA at almost $129 million. So it's not about just adding salary. He's like, okay, he wants to add the right parts and the right pieces.
And most of this, Sean, is perpetuated by LeBron James drawing a line in the sand, demanding that some of the players that he thinks should still be on this roster have to get paid. And by doing that, has forced the general manager and the ownership to pony up more money than probably the value of the player at that particular time frame.
Yeah. Like you said, pay Tristan Thompson. Well, then Tristan Thompson plays, every 5 games where he actually is, worth the value of his contract. Maybe waiting to see that happen in the finals.
And who is LeBron James talking about when he says, well, we're a top-heavy basketball team? Clearly, you're not talking about Tristan Thompson, because Tristan Thompson isn't averaging as many rebounds as Kevin Love, isn't averaging as many points, isn't shooting as many three-point shots. So obviously, you're talking about we're a top-heavy basketball team and we need to improve the roster. Well, how many other positions need to be improved upon your starting roster in order for you to be, quote unquote, a basketball team that's going to compete with what the Golden State Warriors are doing?
Yeah, it's like I said, losing the little recent stretch that they had been on, I think has gotten them all worried. And yeah, they still wanted to they still need a playmaker. And I don't know that a huge trade is what's going to happen. Getting Wade, getting Carmelo, or anything like that to Dan Gilbert, for as bad as he was and as bad as he handled that situation with LeBron the first time around. He's bent over backwards to make LeBron happy and make this Cavaliers team a competitive team. You can't. It's funny. LeBron said, "Oh, we're not out here playing fantasy basketball," when he was kind of, dismissing the Carmelo rumor. Well, in his head, he kind of is. Right. He is really just trying to bring every single superstar or every single piece of great player in the NBA to his team so that he can not have to play his minutes.
This is what's so funny to me, Shaw. Like, I got 2 points to make about this before we kind of, let me get your final thoughts on this. But let me give you this first point first and what I'm going to follow up with. To your point about the fantasy thing and what LeBron James is doing, I feel like LeBron James is kind of like Harriet Tubman with the Underground Railroad, right? I mean, ultimately, there's a road that leads to freedom, and most people are willing to go topside and willing to sacrifice players and people and bloodshed to get to that point. If I make it, I make it. And if I don't, I don't. But others are like, I want us all to make it, and this is the best way to do it, and I'm going to try and lead as many people safely to the pasture as I can. And what LeBron James did, when I told you that he has opened up Pandora's box by him putting together these quote-unquote super teams by sacrificing the money, and an organization willing to do that, okay, in his own way, I feel like, so that he doesn't get chastised for what Kevin Durant did, it willingly want to go to a team that he wants to play for, a team that has a system that he's willing to sacrifice. Look, let's not get it twisted. We know that Kevin Durant's going to get paid the money, but guess what? The Golden State Warriors didn't put themselves in a luxury tax situation like the Cleveland Cavaliers did, so they knew what they were going to do in order to get a player like them, and they wanted that player, so they did what was necessary, and moving forward, they can still be able to sign Steph Curry ultimately when the time presents itself, right? They can negotiate that down the road. But LeBron James is basically saying, well, I'm not happy about what's going on. You need to go get another player, get me another quote unquote playmaker type player. In essence, you're doing the same exact thing, only you're saying I want management to do it and not me. But everybody knows it's LeBron James that's doing it.
Well, what's funny to me is like you have I love these guys. I mean, I love these players. Like I said, Rondo, going back a little bit, Rondo was very intentional on his Instagram post where he left Ray Allen out, right? He was my vets, and no Ray Allen was in the picture. If you're listening to LeBron, even kind of like when he's quote unquote backing off of his comments about Dan Gilbert and Griffin and, the general manager of what they've been able to do, it's like, well, we have 14 guys here. We have 14 guys here. We have 14 guys here. Keep alluding to the fact that they have an extra roster spot. So he's like, yo, no matter what's being said in that 14 guys, he's saying, listen, we have 14 guys, meaning we have one extra spot by NBA rules that we can fill and you can pay. That's what he's trying to allude to at this point. So even though he's quote unquote trying to back off of some of the scathing things that might have been said or might have been interpreted between his comments about Gilbert and Griffin and that roster, he still very much wants what he wants. And I think, for a solution-based, conversation, it's not going to be some superstar. It's going to be the guys like even a guy like Rondo, if he were to get traded or bought out. It's be a guy like Jameer Nelson from the Denver Nuggets if he were to get traded or bought out. Even some other free agents that we've discussed previously, Jarrett Jack, Mario Chalmers, all those guys were coming back from injury. Veteran guys who can help the Cavaliers, who can play, make, and shoot the three ball as much as they like to do. I think those are the types of pieces and players that they can bring onto this roster. It's not some superstar, potential Hall of Fame All-Star guy that's going to come to the Cavaliers team and save them this season. They're defending champions. They don't need saving. LeBron is really trying to take some time off here in the regular season and not lose games. That's what it boils down to, because he wants to start cutting down his minutes as the season progresses. He shouldn't be leading league in minutes. That he's 100% correct about. But he's really trying to okay, I want to make sure that we're 100% good. And I think that's fine. I just think he's going about it in the wrong way.
Well, listen, I have my conspiracy theory happening right now with this whole Cleveland situation. Let it not be said that I believe LeBron James is purposely venting his frustrations to facilitate a move to try to bring either Carmelo Anthony or Dwayne Wade to the Cleveland Cavaliers and pressure Dan Gilbert to be the initiator. I think more so Melo, simply because the Cleveland Cavaliers don't want to have anything to do with Phil Jackson at this moment in time. So they're going to now force he's trying to do it so he could force the Cleveland Cavaliers to initiate trying to make something happen in order to bring the melodrama to Cleveland.
Did he not say that at one point? He'd be like, well, I don't know, maybe at one point, towards the end of our careers, I'd love to have all of us together. And he's talking about all his boys, Carmelo, CP3, Wade, all of them. He said, hey, it'd be great to get that happen at one point. I don't know how it'd get done. But I think it was maybe a year or two ago that comment came out. So, I mean, it's not implausible. It's something that could very well come to fruition, especially with rising caps and rising salaries. And if Melo and Wade and those guys are willing to take a little less money, because he's never going to be the dude that's going to take less money. He wants to be the highest paid player in the NBA at all times. So it's something to look out for. I don't think it's going to happen this year, but it's something to definitely look out for the next couple of seasons as we move forward in the NBA.
Drama reigns in the East, and the seeds have been planted. And let's hope some poison ivy sprouts out as the outcome as we start looking at the situations happening with the New York Knicks, Chicago Bulls, and the Cleveland Cavaliers. You're tuned to The Baseline. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Breakdown. Time now for The Drop. Cal Lee, Warren Shaw of the Baseline NBA podcast. This week on The Drop, who you got? You can get with this, or you can get with that. So let's talk about this. This being Denver Nuggets phenom. Guy coming in, only 21 years old. Looks like my man is ready to start getting his name thrown out there with some serious considerations as one of the better bigs in the NBA. The name, Nikola Jokic. And on the other side, would you want to get with that? Well, how about our man? I'm telling you, Shaw, I keep saying this and I'm going to keep advocating on it. I'm going to throw it up on Twitter every single time. The New York Knicks need to stop messing around after they move Carmelo Anthony. Need to give that number 1 jersey. I think Derrick Rose has it though, but give Krstaps Porzingis, that number 1 jersey, because his name needs to be KRS1. That should be his hashtag. He would be legendary. His brand would be astonishing. He will be the man. But if we had to pick, we starting our rosters, we starting our teams. The question for you, Shaw, the question for our listeners, who do you got? Nikola Jokic or Krstaps Porzingis?
I think the better player right now is actually Jokic. I don't think there's much question about that.
Say what?
I think if you're looking at it, what in totality, what Jokic provides, for his team and his roster, he's a better overall passer. He's comparable defensively to some degree. And again, he can score and he can rebound. He doesn't have the same flair that Krstaps does. Krstaps is a better 3-point shooter. Is going to get out there and is probably a little bit more mobile and playing the 3 and the 4 position. But what Jokic does for the Denver Nuggets in that system and in being a true facilitator, almost in a Marc Gasol-ish type fashion, if you will, and being so young and still getting to where he needs to get, Jokic is further along at his stage of his career than Krstaps is. Like I don't think that's really debatable to me. Porzingis, however, is more of the franchise type guy. He's more of the guy that if you're building your team around, he's going to sell tickets. He's going to, get the endorsement deals, and he's going to get all of those things. So when it comes to the totality of it, Porzingis is probably the better and the safer pick. But Jokic right now is I don't think it's questionable, is the better player.
Well, listen, I think Jokic is definitely a baller. I completely agree with you. And I think time will tell, so to speak. My problem with the idea that Krstaps wouldn't be the better of the two is under what circumstances are we really dictating Krstaps Porzingis and his what he's shown us so far? I got to tell you, it impresses me, number one, that he has the propensity to be averaging close to 19 points per game, and it's only in his second season, right? I mean, this guy really has a potential to be a 20, 23 point per game type scorer with a New York Knicks basketball team that really is hampered by them acquiescing their game around a legendary scorer, Carmelo Anthony. Ultimately, I really think that if Krstaps Porzingis was playing next to Derrick Rose with no Carmelo Anthony, he's easily giving you 23, 24 points per game a night. Okay. Now, there is some question as far as his stamina, his ability to hold his own against some of the other bigger power forwards in the game. But let it not be said that his athleticism, to me, is the other big upside of something that I'm trying to say. Maybe it's something that I think is lacking in Jokic's game that I'm not yet seeing, but maybe part of that is predicated because he's playing in a system where as a big, he has to play like a natural big. To your credit, though, and to your point, Shaw, the fact that he has the passing capabilities that he does, there's a little bit more versatility for him to be a play creator as well as being a playmaker. And I think time will tell if he continues to play in Denver. But if the New York Knicks eventually move Carmelo Anthony, maybe we get to see the flourishing of an offensive threat as someone like a Krstaps Porzingis with his height and athleticism.
Yeah, well, let's go ahead and extrapolate things a little bit right now.
Extrapolate. Ooh, I'm sorry. You shook me with that one, Shaw. Extrapolate.
Well, in terms of the minutes played, because
Get
the raw
surgical on me, Shaw. Get surgical on me. I'm sorry.
Because the raw stats, I think, really don't necessarily tell the entire story right now. So I love what you said about Krstaps post Carmelo, if you will. If Melo wasn't there, what will we see Porzingis doing? Both of these guys, Porzingis and Jokic, they struggle with fouls. They're still very foul prone, still learning to play the game, both 21 years old, whatever, and you figure that eventually is going to figure itself out. But Porzingis at this point right now is getting almost 34 minutes a night, 33 and a half, while Jokic is getting 26.1. So if you extrapolate those numbers out to my favorite per 36-minute average, and I know it doesn't account for fatigue and all those other things like that too, Porzingis trails Jokic in terms of points, because Jokic would be at 21.4, 11.7 rebounds, and 5.5 assists with a block and a steal per game. Porzingis, on the other hand, would be at 20.2 points, 7.6 rebounds, 1.4 assists, and then where he beats Jokic is in the 2.1 blocks per game. The percentages, again, 3-point percentage, Porzingis still has that advantage, but Jokic is better around the rim and is just more adept at being a post presence out there. And I think Jokic has an expanding perimeter game that can develop. So looking at all those things, offensive rating as well too. Jokic at 129 offensive rating, 110 defensive rating. Porzingis 110 offensive rating and 109 defensive rating. So offensively, Jokic is 100 times more efficient. He's just a better player right now. But again, I'm trying to sell tickets. I'm still trying to win. I think Porzingis is that guy that most franchises would choose to build around. But you cannot sleep on what Jokic is doing in Denver.
Call me the franchise. And by the way, Shaw, I might be really seriously before this season ends. I'm seriously considering to buy you a basketball jersey and putting the number 36 behind it with your initials.
Why is that, sir?
Because you love you some PER 36. You love you know what I'm saying? You love that statistic, man. That you live and die by that. I mean, and maybe to your credit, Shaw, this is a good thing because again, we can't truly measure from a statistical standpoint because it's so different. Even though they play similar positions, it's how they're being utilized that I think is really where it becomes very dicey. Ultimately, what I'm looking at, Shaw, is what I've seen from Krstaps Porzingis so far eerily reminds me of what we were talking about just a week ago with Giannis Antetokounmpo. Okay, I just feel like when you have a guy that has this kind of athleticism with this length and height, that just can't be taught. And he does have a discipline to his game. I think that if he continues to work on those elements and he is around a team that facilitates his ability to do the things that is making him as good as he is, I think that he can accelerate his maturation process to that level of greatness. And when I say greatness, I'm talking about being among the all-stars. Like right now, listen, I was advocating for Krstaps Porzingis to being basically an all-star, considering other front court players in the Eastern Conference, meaning there are guys that have already been in the playing in his position that are nowhere near the level of what Krstaps Porzingis has shown through spurts of this NBA season. And minus the fact that the Knicks went on that losing 13 of 18 basketball games, Krstaps Porzingis was vital in their run to getting them 3 games over 500 and being somewhere in the middle of the pack at one point in the Eastern Conference. And I just feel like with Jokic, I'm still waiting to see where his game equates to the explosive totality. Now, to your credit, Shaw, the Denver Nuggets have improved their basketball play, and maybe it's because they are now starting to facilitate more through Jokic, which is why it's offering the comparison, right?
There's no maybe about it. Mike Malone has come out and said exactly that. He's like, listen, we screwed up, trying to figure out a way to play Jokic and Nurkic together, and not really just giving Jokic the ball and letting him handle and facilitate for us on a regular basis. Again, I want to keep using the comparison. He's very Gasol-like. He's getting the ball at that mid post, that free throw line extended, and facilitating all kinds of great looks. He's making behind the back passes. He's doing the dribble handoffs. He's swinging the ball to the corner, very much in that way. And obviously, like another great big man back in the day, who we often reference as Arvydas Sabonis. I think Jokic just has that skill level, and he's still growing into that. Again, still just 21 years old, as is Porzingis. But I really do like how Denver has realized the errors of their ways. And I think that's another thing, too, that might have hurt his statistics some. If they would have been giving him the minutes and playing through him to the beginning of the year, as they probably should have, he might really be up there and probably would have gotten a little bit more consideration, for getting an all-star nod in the Western Conference because, he's not really a snub, but he's definitely worthy of mention when it comes to that in the Western Conference. And the Nuggets have all of it. all of their success in terms of how they've transitioned to their rough start to being better because they played through Jokic and they've gotten Gallinari to be healthy and all those things too. But he's been immense for them overall.
All right, so let's go ahead and extrapolate our opinions and our perspective. You have Jokic. That's who you got.
Who I got? No, I don't.
What?
No, I make the case. I make the case in terms of why Jokic would be the guy, and I'm being 100% honest in it. But if I was starting a franchise today, and again, I'm being an owner and being a general manager, all the things that I'm taking into place, I'm still taking Porzingis over Jokic, although I think Jokic is a better player today in 2017.
All right, well, I'm taking Porzingis. And it's not because I'm advocating to have his name as KRS-One. I'm just saying I'm taking Porzingis because I think Porzingis – let's throw one other caveat into this situation. Porzingis was basically doing this under two different head coaches. Okay. So to me, in my opinion, and the way that I'm looking at the way Krstaps Porzingis can elevate his game, if there is a consistent head coach who really knows how to utilize his talents and his skills, I think that his ascension could be a lot further along than my expectations will be maybe of Jokic. But let it not be said that if Mike Malone has a little, in him, like Jason Kidd, we could very well be talking about two perennial all-stars in the next year or two in the Eastern and Western conferences, respectively. You're tuned to The Baseline. Kyle Lee, Warren Shaw, discussing the hot button topics of the NBA. And this was The Drop.
Coast.
Time now to go coast to coast, discussing the news in the association. You ready to rock and roll, Mr. Shaw?
Absolutely, man. Let's ride.
All right. The NBA All-Star reserves have been officially announced. Are you surprised by the selections?
Well, no, I'm not too surprised. I don't think there's too many snubs. I was happy to be 100% correct. Kudos, pats on the back. Diamond Dallas Page, self-high five.
Your self-congratulatory ass. Go ahead.
On the Eastern Conference, that's what it boils down to. I picked all those right. The Western Conference, I just didn't feel the need for there to be 4 Warriors. Clay and Draymond both got on, so c'est la vie. That left Cat out in the cold a little bit, but overall, I think it was a good selection.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that Cat wasn't selected, but I think it was it was tough anyway. Somebody was, had to be out. It's really some great performances so far by a plethora of different guys. So, but listen, let it not be known that Cat will definitely find himself in the mix and in the conversation for future All-Stars to come. All right, out in OKC. Boy, let it not be said that this boy Enes Kanter, man, you would think that this guy would be on the headlines for the right reasons. Basically, he pulls an Amari Stoudemire and he breaks his forearm slamming the chair during a game. He is out 6 to 8 weeks. In my head, I'm just thinking, what is Russell Westbrook thinking when he sees something like this?
He's just like, you know what? Maybe this isn't really for me, this OKC thing. Because Kanter, bro, that's just ridiculous. And there's a lot of stuff that was made about it.
Kanter getting cantankerous.
You know what I mean? Like, as I say, walls and chairs and fire hydrants, those things, they remain undefeated. If you try to hit them, they never lose. They don't have no L's on their roster. And I think Shaq and those guys on TNT, they made a great point. It's like, oh, he's more mad at the chair than he was at Zaza Pachulia when Zaza threw down Russell Westbrook. And that's a problem.
That tells you something. That tells you it's maybe Russell Westbrook should be yelling that I need some, players with some heart. Show me some heart on my basketball team.
So we'll see what happens, man. And I think it really hinders, Russ's ability at some point maybe to even continue the triple-double run, because Kanter's a great offensive weapon for the OKC Thunder and a great source of Westbrook's assist. So,
let it not be said after what happened in the Sunday primetime matchup, the Sunday showcase against the Cleveland Cavaliers. I don't know how many point-blank layups that the Oklahoma City Thunder missed in that game, but they certainly could have used Kanter to make those easy under-the-basket layups.
Yeah, and I think it's really going to hurt their overall run in the Western Conference in that of itself, because now you're looking for Laverne and Sabonis and those guys, Steven Adams, to really step up. And they're sitting 6 in the West right now, 6-7 right now, battling with Memphis. They're going to need to figure out a way to replace that production one way or the other.
Enes Kanter leading the NBA with double-doubles off the bench, definitely a very, very, very solid piece now missing for the next 2 to possibly 3 months. Larry Sanders. I think we remember our boy Larry Sanders. Used to formerly play for the Milwaukee Bucks. And no, he's not a comedian, although some of the stuff he got himself in trouble for was somewhat comedic. But now we've learned that Larry Sanders is working out for NBA teams in hopes of a return. Shaw, man, is it possible to see this guy back on a basketball court?
I just hope he's in the space, in his personal life where that's a possibility. Larry Sanders, he had some, emotional issues and depression and things like that he was dealing with, and just wasn't really excited about the game and had to step away, left a lucrative contract on the table with the Milwaukee Bucks. And if he's ready to go and he feels like he is, then, great. He worked out for the Boston Celtics, who could definitely use a presence in terms of a rim protector, a rebounder, and a guy who can block shots. That's what he was known for, kind of a pseudo or retro Ben Wallace, if you will. If he can come back, then all powers to him. I mean, I'd love to see it happen. It'd be a great story for the NBA and a great story for the league in general.
Well, listen, I hope Larry Sanders does, figure it out. But I hope that his intent to coming back is for the right reasons. And the right reasons is because he loves playing the game of basketball. I never like seeing a basketball player try to make a comeback, and it's for the reasons that didn't make you a successful basketball player. Some of them, they do it because they want to make money. Others, they do it specifically for the ego factor. Some of them do it because they actually truly believe in their heart of hearts that they are the savior for any basketball team that needs to win an NBA championship. But whatever the reasons are, whatever your driving force is, let it make sure that it's fixated and driven towards the game of basketball, and that's what I'm hoping is the case. I hope it's not that he feels like he needs to put himself back in financial situations that'll make him better, and then he becomes a mockery and absolute bust, and is now basically has a traveling case everywhere he goes, because nobody actually believes that he was the player that he formerly was. So hopefully things will work out for him. I would love to see him on the basketball court, because man, he used to posterize some people with some of the blocks that he used to do. My man was like pre-Hassan Whiteside, you know what I'm saying? Like you may not have been talking much about whatever was going on in Milwaukee, but you definitely were talking about some of the blocks that Larry Sanders put on people when he was playing in the NBA. Finally, Shaw, the word is that Champagne Papi is planning to produce and host the NBA awards show on June the 26th. What do we make of our man Drake handling all of the behind-the-scenes business for the upcoming NBA awards show?
I should be asking you this, because I know that's your dude, that's your homie, Drizzy.
Well, I tried to reach out to him, to get like his, to get his perspective on it. Unfortunately, he said that right now he's working with, Pharrell and the Neptunes and their possible remake for the NHL. So right. as far as I'm concerned, he's there's some busy cats, man. They trying to change the game in all sports avenues. So
it should be an interesting time, no matter what happens. I think the league is looking at ways to make the awards process a little bit more exciting and more appealing to these millennials who have, inserted themselves into the game in the way that they have. And, Drizzy's a guy who people relate to in that way. And, like I said, it'll be fine one way or the other. As long as the awards themselves are not a mockery, the show, I don't really care too much about.
Well, the word has it that he may also be getting J-Lo and the In Living Color dancers back on board.
Oh,
you know what I'm saying? To roll out and do the intros. So I'll be looking forward to that.
Hey,
listen, I'm definitely looking forward to if he were to bring out J-Lo. You know what I'm saying? So
I don't think too many people would be upset about that.
I know. Not me. No, sir. Not I. I mean, you know what I'm saying? I mean, what do we need Drake for? I mean, that's the only reason why we want Drake anyways.
I was saying Living Color homie would play that.
Yeah, exactly. Awesome show this week, Shaw, man. Really hitting on all parts of what's going on right now in the NBA. What more can be said, man? Listen, this is what happens when the stakes are raised. And, people can say what they want to say about the Golden State Warriors making this a mockery of an NBA season. But listen, I beg to differ. I'd like to thank the Golden State Warriors for doing what they did this offseason, because now they got teams shook. And if teams want to roll and run with the Golden State Warriors, then we got all of this kind of nonsense happening right now.
No, it's the truth, and I think what it boils down to is everyone is a rat race. But I think some people need to be realistic about, their chances in this race, and maybe it's time to start hedging your bets a little bit and start
they might find themselves, in a Nesta Carter situation. They keep messing around with this. So
again, it's going to be wild in the NBA streets these final couple weeks. All-Star coming up, and the trade deadline right behind that. Again, I can't wait to see how the season plays out and what these teams do. And I feel like we're going to get something monumental to happen one way or the other in terms of maybe a superstar or two getting moved and some pieces being shifted around in the NBA. But at the end of the day, I still think it's going to be the Golden State Warriors and Cleveland Cavaliers.
Definitely. And look, I can't wait to continue to follow along with this situation. Clearly now the heat is definitely taking up another notch when we talk about NBA trade deadline. Shaw, you called it. Trade season is definitely opened up. It'll be very interesting to see what kind of moves may possibly be made, not just with some of the more unmentioned players that are looking to be key cogs in teams that are playoff potential, but ultimately some organizational team shaking type deals that may actually have an impact about the teams that we've been talking about now, what's going to happen to them moving forward. Once again, we'd like to thank everybody tuning in here to the Baseline. Once again, be sure to catch us on the Twitter at NBA Baseline. For the Baseline, Callie, Warren Shaw, we appreciate you guys. You know we do. And we'll catch up with you next time.